Welcome to the Search and Rescue Night Operations Primer. My name is Ken Huey. I'm the training officer with the Georgia Appalachian Trail Club Search and Rescue Team. The agenda for this brief introduction is to talk a little bit about night operations and when they're utilized, to talk about some of the challenges and hazards of night operations, and to talk about some of the strategies and techniques that are utilized specific to night operations. Night operations, a common question is, do teams need to deploy at night? Well, that depends on several factors, including the traditional search urgency chart, which everyone watching this is probably familiar with. There are certain scenarios where the urgency is extreme, and in those cases, utilizing night search may very well be the best option. Other factors include, are there competent SAR teams that have trained and operated at night available to be deployed? The incident commander's comfort level. There are some ICs that have experience with teams and putting them in the field at night, and they're very comfortable. There are other ICs that are very reluctant to put teams in the field at night. There are weather and safety considerations. There are issues related to the support or lack thereof and lack of infrastructure to support teams at night, whether it be teams' lack of communication equipment back to base or base lack of communication equipment. Other considerations might be what the subject might be doing. Subjects statistically have a tendency to not move at night, so you may be able to make ground and naturally catch them at night, whereas during the day they're more likely to be a moving target. Sadly, there are many times when night deployment would be called for, but due to issues beyond the search urgency, they are not. The hazards and challenges of operating at night. The primary hazard is limited visibility. Limited visibility of the primary detector, that's ourselves, the searcher. It's up to us to look for clues and to look for the subject, and at night that's harder. We have limitations in light sources. There are good light sources and bad light sources. They're not all created equal. Some natural lighting considerations. A full moon with a clear sky is a lot different than overcast with no moon. The possibility of injury at night is increased. The possibility of eye injuries increases at night. That's why it's always important to wear protective eye gear. There are navigational challenges, obviously, at night. It's important to remember that we do utilize the same principles at night that we do for daytime navigation operations. It's just a lot more complicated and difficult at night. Some strategies and techniques specific to night operations. It's not necessarily intuitive, but practice more during the day and it becomes easier to operate at night. The same principles apply at night as they do during the day. If you are not very comfortable with operating during the day, the basic skills, plotting coordinates, terrain association, associating terrain features on the map, visually knowing what they will look like when you're walking across them, calculating distances, bearings. If you're not very comfortable in doing those during the day, it becomes even more difficult at night, because at night there are other factors. So you need to have these basics so they become almost second nature, so you can focus on those unique nighttime aspects. To have both of them going on at the same time where you're not comfortable in daytime and then thrust into a nighttime operation scenario is very uncomfortable. I mentioned earlier natural lighting. It's important to look, if you're called either to do training or to deploy at night, what phase is the moon in? There's a huge difference between a full moon versus no moon. It also potentially impacts whether or not your subject might be moving. We need to consider man-made lighting sources. Not all lighting sources are the same. For nighttime operations, I recommend at least 3 sources of lights. You need to have a primary light source, which is like a headlamp. Not all headlamps are the same. They have different beams, different intensities, different lumens. It's important to talk to an experienced team member to help you select a good headlamp. It's important to have a backup light source. I recommend a second headlamp and then a smaller third light source. Whether or not you go 2, 3 light sources, it's also important to have extra batteries. Additional item for teams operating at night and training at night, and this takes practice. You need to learn the discipline of not blinding and destroying your team members' night vision by shining a headlamp or other light source directly into their eyes. Normal tendency is you have a headlamp on, you're going to talk to a team member, you turn to look at them before you talk to them. If you do that with a headlamp and you don't cover that headlamp or turn it down to the ground, you're going to blind your team member, and as a detector, they're going to be impacted negatively for some period of time till some of their night vision is recovered. Determining distance at night is more difficult. Everyone watching this should already have or soon will have their pace counts used to be able to determine and count off distance traveling across terrain. At night, people have a tendency to take smaller steps, so therefore the pace count at night is going to many times be different than it is during the daytime, especially if you're off trail. At night, we'll utilize more micro-navigation strategies. These micro-navigation strategies is too big a subject to cover in this video, but some that you're familiar with are things such as attack points, collecting features, catching features, aiming off. At night, we will try to utilize attack points that are closer, if possible, to our next destination. Therefore, the probability of having an error is reduced. We'll make use of collecting features even more so at night. If we're traveling from point A to point B, and between point A and B we know we're going to be crossing 2 creeks and a trail, then we will make a more concerted effort to note that we've crossed the first creek, we should be crossing a second creek, we did, we should be crossing a trail, we did, now we are getting close to our objective. Utilizing sat-nav or GPSs at night. This is really important for nighttime operations, to be very comfortable utilizing your sat-nav. I recommend, in addition to having this technology, that we also practice and form the habit of oftentimes getting our grid coordinates and then plotting those grid coordinates on our paper map. This is so we can glance down as we're navigating and we're looking for terrain association keys. We can glance down and we can see a breadcrumb, general breadcrumb of where we've been and where we're going, instead of having to look at the GPS. Some GPS, especially older GPSs, may not even have updated topo maps or topo maps at all. So by periodically recording our grid coordinate onto the map, it provides a quicker way and to reference our general location and where we're going and what we should be seeing as we move forward. Following azimuths at night, I would recommend in most cases that we don't try to follow a fixed azimuth for a fixed distance. There's not too many scenarios where we would need to do that. However, if you have to do that at night, it becomes a challenge because there's a principle or there's a scenario where you have a tendency to drift, especially if you're moving across non-level terrain and you're focused on looking down at your compass more often as you're walking, because you can't see a feature in the distance that you picked to sight to and then walk to. So you have a tendency to drift downhill and drift away from your azimuth, even though your compass looks like you're dead on. There are ways to mitigate that, and you just need to practice some of those. And one strategy actually utilizes people on your team. So you would send someone out, another searcher with a light source and a radio, and you would communicate with them and send them in a general direction, and then tell them to stop, and then tell them to move left, move right. And as soon as they are in the direction that you need to move azimuth-wise, you would have them stop. And they basically become that rock or that tree that in the daytime you could pick out and then walk to. And then you do that over and over and over in order to walk an accurate azimuth. The most likely scenario where you would be utilized at nighttime would be a hasty search. It's the most common, it's safer, it's quicker. You're moving along a path or a route of travel or some prominent terrain feature. But even with hasty searches, you need to be a highly qualified, clue-conscious team, and expect there may be scenarios where if you find an important clue, you will have to leave and go off trail. Area searches at night are not as common and only normally reserved for the most urgent scenarios. Whether it be a hasty search or an area search, if it's done at night, it needs to be repeated during the day if you haven't found your subject. Critical spacing for area searches is much smaller, so it's going to take longer or more searchers to cover the same area. There's another type of search which is utilized at night, and it's called sound search. Sound normally travels further at night, barring rain or weather conditions that would mute the sound traveling. Sound search is a very systematic, organized way of using sound to attract your subject. It's not just randomly making noise. It's making noise at a predetermined location and then waiting a predetermined amount of time quietly so you can listen. It often involves setting up a sound attractor along a containment feature or a catching feature. Obviously, if you use a sound device along a catching feature, you want it to stay in the same spot. You don't want to be moving the vehicle half a mile, sound the siren again, move another half a mile, sound the siren, especially if you want your subject to come to that sound. Support infrastructure. Radio communications are vital day or night. Support team needs to be just as competent as the field team, ideally either a current member of a field team or with prior field experience. Your ideal support team is there in the event that an accident happens, a subject is found, you need to bring in more resources, and the reality is at nighttime there is an increased chance for accidents. So you want a very strong, competent support team. Other nighttime resources that are sometimes available are canine resources, tracking teams that often prefer to operate at night because they can control the light and therefore the shadows for the sign they're looking for, FLIR-equipped aircraft, forward-looking infrared radar, and occasionally you might operate where you have access to or have resources that have access to night vision goggles. And hope this introduction helps give you some things to consider regarding the unique aspects of doing night operations in search and rescue. Thank you, and we'll talk with you later.